Welcome on in, guys. It's three bold takes. It's Freddie, it's Chase, it's Quinn. Guys, we are back. We just have gotten through week 0. Technically, if you're on ESPN, it's going to be week 1, just going into this next week as well. Concluded so far, guys. We had the biggest game so far to start the season. We got on here last week, gave you our prediction about Florida State and Georgia Tech, guys. And personally, for me, I texted it, and I'm going to say it on the podcast. I've never been more excited in my life to be 0-1 in predictions. And that's going to be all three of us. Quinn, I thought about your words all week long last week. Guys, no matter what happens, we're going to have the same record, and we do. Florida State lost. Florida State lost, guys. A big, big thing. If you've not seen the game, somehow you didn't watch college football this past weekend, Florida State got upset by Georgia Tech by 3. Florida State number 10 coming into this season in Ireland. They lost, guys. And that is, I'm going to go first. This is DJU looked horrible. I think he hid behind Oregon State a lot and how good of a run game that they had. Damian Martinez up there, Jonathan Smith. I think he really helped, which is good for him, which was why it was kind of mind-boggling for him to leave Oregon State. I know the coach left, but he really fit in over there. But you saw what happened at Clemson. You're seeing what is happening at Florida State. And I know it's week 0, Chase. They could still make the ACC championship. They could still potentially make the playoffs. At the end of the day, DJU's not the guy to be a pass-heavy offense with or to run a spread offense with. And kind of like how I mentioned on the back end of that podcast the other day was this was not the same Florida State team from last year. They were not going to come out with any sort of vengeance and be ready to play this game. And this is a huge implicated game in the first week of the season with an ACC matchup, man. I've never been more excited to see Georgia Tech walk off with a win. That's me, though.
Yeah, I knew that you were going to be super happy that DJ had a horrible game. I knew that you were going to come on here and just flame him, which he should be flamed for. This is my biggest thing about this game. Now, I told you guys to take the Georgia Tech and the points in that last video. Did not say money line, even though I did on like my personal self twice, actually, 2 separate bets. However, if you look at this game, Georgia Tech dominated on the lines of scrimmage offensively and defensively. And that's the biggest problem with Florida State to me. Now, you know, they had Roydell Williams come in from Alabama. He was supposed to have a breakout, probably season for them to fill in that role to help DJ out. 12 carries for 38 yards, right? But then you look at, like, what causes that, and it's the offensive line. They looked horrible. I mean, they were so bad. Now, when you look at Florida State's defense in modern era of college football, you only give up 24 points. You're supposed to win that game because typically nowadays you're scoring 35 points if you're an elite team. Florida State's not an elite team. They're a fraud this year. I'm going to go ahead and say it. Now, this is my overreaction. They're a fraud. Now, they'll make a bowl game, but I see at least probably 3 losses on their schedule if they play like this. If DJ does not get any better, which if we've learned anything throughout his college career, is that he's the same today as he was when he was at Clemson, and that is overrated and not very good at the quarterback position. Now, Florida State's got to buckle up, right? I mean, because they've got Florida on the schedule, right? Like they've got Clemson. Like, well, they may not play Clemson, but they have got teams on the schedule that are hungry, right? Like the ACC looks kind of more wide open now than we may have thought from the get-go. So that's all I've got is that Florida State got dominated on the lines of scrimmage, and Georgia Tech, congratulations, this is a huge win.
Look, everybody's mad at DJU, saying he's terrible and he's the reason they lost the game. I don't know what the rest of the college football world thought about DJU, but I thought he had a pretty decent DJU game. Threw for almost 200, completed 70%, didn't turn the ball over. For me, and Freddie, you touched on it, our takeaway of this game is either Florida State is not as good on the line of scrimmage as I thought they were going to be. And if that's the case, then I think your overreaction isn't a terrible one. Or Georgia Tech might be a lot better on the line of scrimmage than I thought they were going to be. I knew they returned 4 or 5 on the offensive line, but I was really impressed with their defensive line. And if this Georgia Tech line of scrimmage shows up throughout the year, Georgia Tech might throw their hat in the ring with VTech and NC State as kind of like this, like right underneath everyone's radar team who you'll blink and they could be like Louisville last year and they're in the ACC title game and you're wondering how they got there, especially now that Florida State's one of the toughest games on their schedule and that's already in the win column for them. Look, I don't want to join the overreaction bus of saying this Florida State team season is over. It's not. They still have Clemson. They still have Florida. They still have Miami. You win all three of those games, and you're good to go. The question is if this Florida State team is the team that is in those games later down the road, and it's a scary start. You look at the schedule Florida State's got coming up. Boston College is next, so you got another ACC game. Then you've got Memphis, which is not going to be the easiest G5 team you can play. Clemson is in the month of September. Like this season is not a slow buildup for the Noles at all. So this is a terrible start for them. Like I said, I'm not going to completely jump on the side of they're out of the playoff, but I do want to start right now the Georgia Tech hype bus to be an improved team from last year, and we could be looking at a serious like dark horse contender in Georgia Tech in the future, especially with this current coaching staff.
And Quinn, I actually want to add to it. Last year, you were one of the first guys on this Georgia Tech train last year. The worst problem with them is that just inconsistency.
Oh, yeah.
A really good team. And so if you listened to Quinn last year, if you watched the podcast last year, if you watched Georgia Tech at all last year, you were thinking, this is a good team. They just needed to put pieces together. And it looks like in week 0 against Florida State over in Ireland, they started to do that. And if they can consistently do that over and over again, you got to remember, I don't know how new fans we have watching our show or whatnot. Hopefully you're a little bit older. You understand. Georgia Tech's a prolific program. They're a really good ACC program. They show up in ACC championship games. They have so in the past decade a few times, even against Clemson. So Georgia Tech's a good team. They're not a bottom feeder historically. And so with this new offense, with Brett Key establishing who they are, this can be a team that contends for the ACC every year, kind of like Quinn just mentioned, with the NC States, with the VTechs that people aren't really looking at because they don't have the name Clemson or Florida State or even Miami. This team can play ball, and if they can put it together, they almost put it together last year. They just coughed it up a couple times. They can put it together this year. They lost to Georgia last year by 8. Number 1 Georgia by 8.
Look, this win, honestly, what it makes me wonder is that last year, if we're dealing with a head coach that's an elite motivator who didn't have the complete foundations of his culture set up at his school yet. Now we're in year 2. All right, you were already pulling off big upsets and staying in games with teams that were better than you. You're still pulling off big upsets. And where you were slipping up was in games that you might have been looking past because you felt big after beating Miami. What if they don't look past those games anymore? What if Wake Forest comes to town and they take care of business in those games?
Yep.
We could be looking at a scary Georgia Tech team. I'm just saying, I don't want to overreactions in 0 week 1. It's the ultimate sin of college football. Don't get too caught up in what you see early. But Haynes King and this Georgia Tech team could be a serious contender down the road.
I mean, at the very least, it's exciting. Right, like,
Yeah.
and I said this last week. This is the funniest outcome possible because I mean, Florida State sued, ESPN, the ACC, all these other people because they got left out of the playoffs and this and that, and I think most of college football, at least fan bases that saw this and thought it was ridiculous, were waiting on Florida State to lose so they can point and laugh, and it didn't take long. I mean, it did not take long. So, yeah.
Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this overreaction. I hope you join us in our overreaction of how bad Florida State's going to be this season. If you're siding with Quinn, just let him know that. But if you're siding with me and Freddie, please let us know. Let us know what you think about DJU, guys. We enjoyed the overreaction. We're excited for what's to come this football season. And we're going to start kicking off our 5 games a week here soon, predictions. So make sure to stay tuned to 3 Bold Takes. It's Quinn, it's Freddie, it's Chase, guys. Thanks for listening.